I'm writing this from a motel room 3 towns over. The police took my statement, but I can tell they think I'm traumatized, maybe hallucinating the finer details due to shock. They have the physical evidence, sure, but they don't understand the timeline. They don't understand how long he was there, how long he was watching me. I need to get this down while the memory is still jagged, before my brain tries to smooth over the cracks to protect itself. If you are reading this and you just bought a fixer-upper way below market value, do yourself a favor. Check the walls, check the crawl spaces, check them now. It started 2 months ago. I was 28, fresh out of a messy breakup and desperate for a change of scenery. When the listing for the Victorian on Oak Haven Drive popped up, I thought it was a glitch in the Zillow algorithm. 4 bedrooms, 3 baths, a wraparound porch, and 3,500 square feet of historic architecture sitting on 5 acres of dense woodland. The price was $85,000. In this economy, that buys you a parking space, not a damn estate. I called the realtor immediately. She sounded tired. She told me it was a bank-owned foreclosure, sold as is, cash only. The previous owners had apparently defaulted and vanished overnight, leaving everything behind. There were no structural issues, no liens, no murder history, just a desperate bank wanting to offload a dead asset before the fiscal year ended. I toured it on a Tuesday. The place was freezing. The utilities had been off for months. It smelled of stale dust and old pine, but the bones were solid. High ceilings, crown molding, a heavy oak staircase that didn't creak, and windows so tall they made me feel like a child standing in front of them. It was beautiful. It was lonely. It was perfect. I signed the papers that Friday. The move-in was scheduled for the first weekend of November. The weather reports were already screaming about a historic blizzard barreling down from the north, a bomb cyclone that was supposed to bury the county in 3 feet of snow. I ignored the warnings. I just wanted to get my boxes inside and shut the door on the world. I rented a U-Haul, packed my meager life into it, and drove the 2 hours north into the deep woods. By the time I pulled into the gravel driveway, the sky was a bruised shade of purple, heavy and low. The trees surrounding the property were stripped bare, looking like skeletal fingers reaching for the house. The house itself loomed dark against the twilight, the windows reflecting the gray sky like dead eyes. I spent the next 6 hours hauling boxes. My breath puffed in white clouds in the foyer. The heating oil delivery wasn't scheduled until the next morning, so the house was essentially a giant icebox. I worked up a sweat just to keep warm, lugging furniture up that grand staircase. It was around 8 p.m. when I finally stopped. I stood in the middle of the living room, surrounded by cardboard towers. The silence hit me first. It wasn't the quiet of an apartment where you can still hear the hum of a fridge or a siren blocks away. This was absolute, suffocating silence. The insulation in these old places is thick, plaster and lath, brick, stone. It swallows sound. "Hello?" I said out loud, just to break the tension. My voice echoed back to me, thin and pathetic. "Hello, hello, hello." I laughed nervously. "Way too big for one person," I muttered, wiping sweat from my forehead. I ordered a pizza, but the delivery guy called and said he couldn't make it up the driveway because the snow had started. I had to walk down to the main road to meet him. By the time I got back to the porch, the flakes were falling thick and fast, size of quarters. The wind was picking up, whistling through the eaves. It sounded like a flute being played badly, a low, mournful note that vibrated in the floorboards. I ate on the floor of the living room, wrapped in a sleeping bag, staring at the empty fireplace. I felt a strange sense of ownership mixed with unease. This was mine. But as the wind howled outside, rattling the pane glass, the house felt enormous, vast, unknowable. I started doing a mental inventory of the rooms I hadn't even entered yet. The 3rd-story attic, the root cellar, the spare bedrooms at the end of the hall. I realized I didn't actually know how many doors this place had. Around midnight, the power flickered.
Just once, a quick dip in the voltage that made the single lamp I had plugged in buzz angrily. I looked out the window. The world was gone, just a wall of white swirling violently against the glass. The road was buried, the driveway was gone. I was trapped. "Just you and me, old girl," I whispered to the house, patting the wall. The wall was freezing to the touch, but as I pulled my hand away, I felt something, a vibration. Not from the wind. It was rhythmic. Thump, thump, thump. It was faint, coming from deep within the structure, maybe the pipes knocking as the temperature plummeted. I told myself it was just the house settling. Old houses breeze, right? They expand and contract. They make noise. I crawled into my sleeping bag, exhausted, eyes heavy. I was alone in a fortress of snow, miles from the nearest neighbor. It was exactly what I wanted. But as I drifted off, listening to the wind scream, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house wasn't just settling. It felt like the house was waking up, and I wasn't the only one inside listening to the storm.
I don't think I slept for the first 3 hours. I just lay there in the center of the living room floor, cocooned in my sleeping bag, staring up at the water stains on the plaster ceiling. The shadows cast by the dying embers of the fire I'd barely managed to start were dancing like frantic ghosts. The storm outside had evolved from a weather event into a siege. The wind wasn't just whistling anymore, it was slamming against the north face of the house with the force of a physical blow. Every gust made the window panes rattle in their frames, a constant, nervous chattering that set my teeth on edge. But it was the cold that really got to me. Without the central heating running yet, the temperature inside was plummeting. I could see my breath pluming in the dark, rhythmic and white. I remember checking my phone, 1:14 a.m., no service. The storm had likely knocked out a tower nearby, or maybe the thick stone walls of the estate were blocking the signal. It didn't matter. I was cut off. That's when I heard it. It wasn't the wind. It wasn't the rattling glass. It was distinct, heavy, and it came from directly above my head. Creak. I froze. My heart hammered against my ribs so hard I thought it would bruise them. I held my breath, straining my ears against the howling wind outside, praying it was just the house settling. Creak, creak, thud. It was the master bedroom. I knew the layout from the tour. The master suite was directly above the living room. The sound was unmistakable, weight shifting on old pine floorboards. It wasn't the scuttling of a rat or the scratching of a raccoon. This was heavy, measured. It sounded like footsteps. I sat up slowly, the nylon of my sleeping bag rustling loudly in the quiet. I winced at the noise, freezing again. The footsteps stopped immediately. For a full minute I sat there, a statue in the dark, listening to the blood rushing in my ears. My rational brain kicked into overdrive, desperate to explain away the terror. It's the pipes, I told myself. The temperature is dropping rapidly. Metal contracts. Wood warps. The whole house is twisting in the cold. It's just thermal expansion. I grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight I'd left beside me and stood up. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dust motes swirling in the stagnant air. I walked to the archway of the living room and shone the light towards the grand staircase. The stairs rose into the darkness of the second floor, like a throat waiting to swallow something whole. "Is anyone there?" I called out. My voice cracked. It sounded small, pathetic. Silence, just the wind battering the walls. I took a step toward the stairs, then another. I told myself I was going to go up there and prove it was nothing. I was going to check the master bedroom, see an open window banging against a frame, and laugh about it in the morning. But I stopped at the bottom step. A primal instinct, something deep in my lizard brain screamed at me, "Do not go up there." The air drifting down from the second floor felt different. It was still, heavy, and smelled faintly musty, like wet wool and something sharper, metallic. Copper? Old pennies? I couldn't place it.
I stood there for 5 minutes, shivering in my hoodie, light trembling in my hand. Nothing moved, no more sounds. "Jesus, get a grip," I whispered. "It's an 80-year-old house in a blizzard. Of course it makes noise." I backed away from the stairs, keeping the light trained on the landing until I was back in the living room. I didn't return to my sleeping bag immediately. Instead, I checked the front door. Locked. Deadbolted. I checked the windows. Latched. I was alone. I had to be alone. I eventually crawled back into the bag, but I didn't turn off the flashlight. I left it on, pointing it at the living room entrance, a singular beam of safety. I told myself I was being paranoid. The stress of the move, the breakup, the financial risk, it was all manifesting as auditory hallucinations. Exhaustion eventually won out. The adrenaline crash hit me, and I drifted into a restless, shallow sleep. I don't know how long I was out. Maybe 2 hours, maybe 3. I woke up with a gasp, my eyes snapping open. The flashlight had died. The room was pitched in absolute suffocating darkness. The fire was out. The wind outside had quieted down to a low, mournful moan. I didn't move. I didn't breathe. You know that feeling when you walk into a room and you know someone has been arguing? The air feels charged? Or when you wake up and you know with absolute certainty that you are being watched? That feeling was pressing down on my chest like a physical weight. The hair on my arms was standing straight up. The skin on the back of my neck crawled. Someone is here. I lay there paralyzed, my eyes darting frantically in the blackness, trying to find a shape, a movement, anything. I strained my ears. From the hallway, just beyond the living room arch, maybe 10 feet away, I heard a soft, wet sound. Snick. It sounded like a tongue parting from the roof of a mouth, or a lip smacking. Then the softest shuffle of fabric against the wall. I fumbled for my phone, panic making my fingers clumsy. I double-tapped the screen. The harsh white light of the lock screen flooded the immediate area. "Who's there?" I screamed, sitting up and swinging the phone around like a weapon. The living room was empty. The hallway was empty. The dust motes danced in the light. There was nothing. I sat there, panting, phone clutched in a death grip, waiting for a monster to lunge out of the shadows. But the house just stared back at me, indifferent and cold. I told myself it was a dream, a hypnagogic hallucination. I was stressed. I was tired. My brain was firing wrong. But as I lay back down, pulling the sleeping bag over my head like a terrified child, I couldn't stop shaking. Because deep down, beneath the layers of rationalization and denial, I knew one thing for sure. I hadn't imagined that sound, and whatever made it wasn't old plumbing.
Daylight has a way of making you feel like an idiot. When the sun finally dragged itself up over the tree line the next morning, the terror of the previous night evaporated like mist. The footsteps became the groan of timber shrinking in the cold. The wet mouth sound became the settling of insulation or maybe snow sliding off the slate roof. I stood in the kitchen, bathed in the harsh gray light of a snowed-in morning, and actually laughed out loud at myself. "You're 28 years old," I thought, brewing a pot of coffee on a camping stove I'd set up on the granite island. The gas wasn't on yet. "You're an adult. Stop acting like a toddler afraid of the dark." The storm was still raging, a white curtain drawn tight around the property, but inside I was determined to make this work. I spent the next 2 days unpacking, blasting podcasts from a battery-powered speaker to fill the silence. I told myself I was settling in. I told myself the house was accepting me. But looking back, I realized the house wasn't accepting me. It was toying with me. It started with the small things, the kind of things you brush off because your brain refuses to process them as threats. On the third morning, I couldn't find my car keys. I know, I was snowed in. My car was a buried lump of white at the bottom of the driveway. I wasn't going anywhere. But I have a habit. Keys go in the bowl by the front door. Always. It's a compulsion. I went to the bowl. Empty. I felt a prick of irritation.
I checked my pockets. Nothing. I checked the kitchen counters. Nothing. I spent 20 minutes tearing apart the boxes I'd unpacked the day before, swearing under my breath. I finally found them in the downstairs powder room. They were sitting perfectly centered on the closed lid of the toilet. I stared at them for a long time. I had used that bathroom once, maybe twice. I didn't remember bringing my keys in there. Why would I? But I reasoned that in the chaos of moving, my muscle memory had glitched. I grabbed them, feeling a cold shiver that had nothing to do with the temperature, and shoved them into my pocket. Just stress, I told myself. You're exhausted. Later that afternoon, it was the thermostat. I walked past the hallway control panel and noticed it was set to 80 degrees. I had left it off because the furnace wasn't working yet. Why would I turn a dead dial to 80? I spun it back down, shaking my head. But the breaking point, the moment where the fear started to curdle into a genuine question of my own sanity, was the milk. I had brought a cooler with me, stocked with essentials until the fridge could be powered up. I had a fresh, unopened half-gallon of milk. I vividly remember cracking the red plastic ring seal that morning for my coffee. I poured a splash, closed it, and put it back in the cooler. That evening, around 6 p.m., I decided to have a bowl of cereal for dinner. I was sitting on the floor of the kitchen, lantern casting long shadows against the cabinets. I reached into the cooler, grabbed the jug, and went to pour. Nothing came out. I shook it. It felt light, too light. I unscrewed the cap and peered inside. It was empty, bone dry, except for a few white bubbles at the bottom. I sat there holding the empty plastic jug, my brain completely misfiring. I calculated the ounces. I had maybe used 2 ounces for coffee. Where did the rest go? Did it leak? I checked the bottom of the cooler. Dry. I checked the trash can. No other milk jugs. Okay, I said aloud. The word hung in the air, dead and flat. Okay. I stood up and walked to the sink. I looked at the drain. There was a faint white residue around the metal ring. Someone had poured the milk down the sink. Someone? No, me. It had to be me. That's when the first real wave of gaslighting panic hit me. It wasn't the fear of an intruder. It was the fear of a break, a psychotic break. I had read about carbon monoxide poisoning causing memory loss and hallucinations. I scrambled to the detector I'd installed in the hallway. The light was blinking a steady, reassuring green. So if it wasn't the air, it was my mind. The isolation was getting to me faster than I thought. The silence was scrambling my neurons. I was doing things, hiding keys, playing with the thermostat, pouring out milk, and immediately forgetting them. I was sleepwalking. That had to be it. Or maybe fugue states from the stress of the breakup. I threw the empty milk jug across the kitchen. It clattered loudly against the wall, a hollow plastic thud that echoed into the living room. "Get it together," I yelled at the empty room. I decided to create a control, a test. Before I went to sleep that night, I took my keys and placed them in the bowl. Then I took a piece of clear Scotch tape and taped the keys to the ceramic. If they moved, I'd have to peel the tape. I checked the back door, locked. I checked the front door, deadbolted. I went upstairs to the second floor for the first time since the footsteps incident, refusing to sleep on the floor again. I chose one of the guest rooms, one with a heavy door and a lock. I dragged a chair in front of it, wedging it under the handle, not because I thought someone was in the house, but to keep myself in. If I was sleepwalking, the chair would trip me up and wake me up. I lay in the bed, wrapped in 3 blankets, listening to the house breathe. The wind had died down, leaving a silence that was even worse, a thick, heavy silence. And as I drifted off, I swear I heard it again, downstairs, in the kitchen. The sound of the refrigerator door opening, the suction seal popping, then a pause, and the door clicking shut. I squeezed my eyes shut. The refrigerator doesn't even have power, I thought desperately. It's just the house. It's just you. It's just you. But deep down, the equation wasn't balancing, and the variable I was missing was hiding right behind the walls.
The next morning, the tape on the keys was unbroken. I stared at it for a long time, sipping coffee that tasted like relief. The keys were exactly where I had left them. The milk in the cooler, I'd bought a new pint from the gas station before the storm hit, was untouched. The chair wedged under my bedroom door hadn't budged an inch. I wasn't sleepwalking. I wasn't going crazy. It was just stress, I told myself. It was the shock of the new environment playing tricks on a tired mind. I actually felt a surge of energy. I was going to beat this house. I was going to renovate it, flip it, and make a fortune. Then, around noon, the smell hit me. I was in the living room stripping old wallpaper that looked like it hadn't been changed since the Nixon administration. At first, it was faint, a subtle, wafting unpleasantness that I attributed to the damp plaster or maybe the age of the house. Old houses have smells. They smell like dust, old paper, and dry wood. That's part of the charm. But this wasn't charm. Within an hour, the scent had curdled into something thick and aggressive. It started in the hallway and seemed to seep into the living room, clinging to the fabric of my clothes. I stopped scraping the wall and sniffed the air. It was sweet, sickly, cloying sweet, like a bag of apples left in a hot car for a week, mixed with something sharp and metallic. "Great," I muttered, tossing the scraper down. "Dead raccoon." It made sense. The house had been empty for months. Some poor critter probably crawled into the walls to escape the cold, died, and now that the house was warming up slightly from my body heat and the space heaters, the decomposition was accelerating. I went on a hunt. I sniffed the baseboards. I checked the chimney flue. I opened the cabinets under the sink. Nothing. I followed the invisible trail of rot until I was standing in front of the large, ornate intake vent in the main hallway. It was a massive iron grate, painted black, screwed into the wall right near the floor. As I knelt down, a draft hit my face. It was cold, damp air, moving despite the furnace being off. And with the air came the full force of the stench. I gagged. I physically retched, covering my nose and mouth with the collar of my shirt. It wasn't apples. It was meat, rotting, spoiled meat. It smelled like the dumpster behind a butcher shop on a hot August day. It was the smell of something large that had been dead for a while. "Oh, God," I choked out, stumbling back. I grabbed my phone. I had 1 bar of service, a miracle. I Googled HVAC repair near me and called the first number that popped up. A guy named Red answered on the 3rd ring. He sounded like he was shouting over a generator. "Yeah, look, I've got a situation," I said, trying not to sound as desperate as I felt. "I'm up on Oakhaven. I think something big died in my vents. The smell is unbearable." There was a pause, and then Red laughed. It was a dry, humorless bark. "Oakhaven? The old Miller place?" "Yeah, that's the one." "Son, have you looked outside? I know the storm is bad, but bad ain't the word. The county pulled the plows off the road 2 hours ago. It's a whiteout. I couldn't get a truck up that driveway if I had a tank. You're stuck with it until the thaw, or at least until the plows run again. Maybe Tuesday." "Tuesday?" I looked at the calendar. It was Saturday. "I can't live with this smell until Tuesday. It smells like a corpse." "Probably a deer," Red said nonchalantly. "They get under the crawl space, curl up near the heat exchange. It happens. Just crack a window and burn a candle. Stay warm." He hung up. I stared at the phone, the silence of the house rushing back in to fill the void left by his voice. Crack a window. If I opened a window, the temperature inside would drop to freezing within an hour. But if I kept them closed, I was trapped in a box with the scent of death. I tried to cover the grate. I found a piece of cardboard and a roll of duct tape. I taped the cardboard over the iron vent, sealing the edges as best I could. It muffled the draft, but the smell was insidious. It felt like it was already in the furniture, in the curtains, in my hair. I spent the rest of the afternoon sitting in the kitchen, the furthest point from the vent, trying to read a book. but I couldn't focus. Every time I inhaled, I tasted it, that copper tang on the back of my tongue. As night fell, the psychological toll began to outweigh the physical nausea. The smell made the house feel hostile. It wasn't just a structure anymore. It was a biological thing, a stomach digesting something rotten. And then the paranoia crept back in. If it was a deer under the house, wouldn't the smell be coming from the floorboards everywhere? Why was it so concentrated in that one vent? And why did the draft feel so strong? I walked back to the hallway. The cardboard was still taped over the grate. I put my ear against the wall next to it. The wind outside was howling again, but inside the wall, behind the grate, I heard something else. It wasn't the scratching of a rat. It wasn't the rustle of a bird. It was a slow, rhythmic wheeze. I pulled back, my heart slamming against my ribs. It sounded like air moving through a constricted pipe, or breathing, heavy, congested breathing. I told myself it was the wind drafting through the chimney and down into the ducts. It had to be. Wind makes weird noises. Wind can sound like voices, like screams, like breathing. But as I retreated upstairs to my barricaded room, clutching a bottle of air freshener like a weapon, I couldn't shake the image of what lay behind that grate. I kept imagining the dark, twisting metal tunnels of the ventilation system, and I kept imagining that the thing smelling of rot wasn't dead at all.
Sunday broke with a deceptive calm. The wind had finally stopped screaming, leaving behind a silence that felt heavy, like a wool blanket soaked in water. The world outside was a blinding, pristine white, the snow piled 4 feet high against the porch railings. It was beautiful in a cruel sort of way. Inside, the air was unbreathable. The cardboard and duct tape I'd slapped over the hallway intake vent were holding back the worst of the dead animal drift, but the scent had permeated the drywall. It hung in the foyer like an invisible fog, rotting meat and something cloyingly sweet, like copper and cheap perfume. I couldn't eat, I couldn't think. I needed to get out of that box, even if it meant freezing. I bundled up, thermal layers, parka, heavy boots, and grabbed a snow shovel from the mudroom. My plan was simple. Clear the back patio, maybe dig a path to the detached garage where the previous owner had left a stack of firewood. I needed physical exhaustion. I needed to sweat the fear out of my system. I exited through the back mudroom door. I have a very specific routine with this door. It has an old-fashioned single-cylinder deadbolt. You have to pull the door hard to get the strike plate to align, then turn the thumb latch until it clicks. I did this. I pulled, I turned, I heard the click, and I tested the handle. Locked. Secure. I spent the next hour outside, shoveling with manic intensity. The cold air burned my lungs, sharp and clean, scrubbing the taste of rot from my throat. I cleared the patio, I cleared a path to the generator housing, I checked the perimeter. The snow was unbroken, a perfect white sheet surrounding the house. No footprints, no tire tracks, just me and the birds. Feeling slightly more sane, I stomped the snow off my boots and headed back to the mudroom door. I reached for my keys, then remembered I'd left the door unlocked. No, wait, I had locked it. I vividly remembered the click. I reached into my pocket for my keys anyway. My hand froze halfway to the handle. The door was slightly ajar. It wasn't wide open, just a crack, maybe half an inch, a sliver of darkness cutting through the white paint. I stood there, the shovel slipping from my gloved hand and landing with a muffled thud in the snow. My breath hitched. I stared at the gap, waiting for it to move, waiting for a face to appear. The wind, I thought desperately. I didn't latch it all the way. The pressure change popped it open. I pushed the door open with the toe of my boot, stepping back as I did. The mudroom was empty. The boots I had lined up by the mat were undisturbed. But as I looked at the lock mechanism, my stomach dropped through the floor. The deadbolt was retracted. The wind can blow a door open, sure, but the wind cannot turn a steel deadbolt counterclockwise. I didn't go in. I backed away, stumbling through the snow, reaching for my phone with trembling fingers. I dialed 911. 911? What is your emergency? Someone is in my house, I gasped. I'm at 404 Oakhaven. I went outside to shovel. The door was locked. Now it's open. The dispatcher was calm, frustratingly so. She told me officers were already in the area dealing with spinouts on the highway and could detour to me. It would take 20 minutes. I waited in the driveway, freezing, clutching the shovel like a medieval weapon. I watched the windows. I expected to see a silhouette, a curtain twitching, anything. But the house just sat there, massive and still. When the cruiser finally crunched up the unplowed driveway, fighting for traction, I almost cried with relief. 2 deputies, big guys with bored expressions, stepped out. They listened to my story. They looked at the door. "You sure you locked it, son?" the older one asked, adjusting his belt. "Cold snaps can make these old jams warp. Bolt doesn't seat right, pops back out." "I tested the handle," I insisted, my voice rising. "It was locked. Someone unlocked it from the inside." They exchanged a look, the city kid panicking in the woods look, but they drew their weapons and went in. I waited by the cruiser. I watched their flashlights sweep through the kitchen, the living room. I saw them go upstairs. I saw the lights flicker in the bedrooms. 10 minutes later, they came back out, holstering their guns. "Clear," the younger one said. "Check the basement, check the attic, check the closets. Place is empty." "Did you check the crawl spaces? There's a smell. I think someone might be hiding." "We checked the utility room," the older deputy said, wiping his nose. "There's a dead rat smell for sure, but that's standard for these foreclosures. Look, there's no sign of forced entry, no wet footprints inside, no disturbed snow outside except yours. But the lock, you probably didn't turn it all the way," he said firmly, cutting me off. "It happens. You're stressed. Big house, big storm, it plays tricks on you." They wrote a report. They handed me a card. They told me to call if I saw actual intruder activity. "Lock up tight," the deputy said as he got back in the car, "and maybe get some sleep." I watched them drive away, the red taillights fading into the white gloom. I had never felt more defenseless in my life. The police, the ultimate safety net, had come and gone. They had declared the house safe. I walked back to the mudroom door. I stepped inside. I turned the deadbolt. Click. I tested the handle. Locked. I leaned my forehead against the cold wood of the door and closed my eyes. The logic was inescapable. If the police were right, I was losing my mind. I was unlocking doors and forgetting. I was hallucinating smells and sounds. But if I was sane, then someone had watched me go outside. Someone had walked to this door, unlocked it, and peered out at me while I shoveled. Someone had stood right here, where I was standing, breathing the same air. And when they saw the police lights, they hadn't left, because there were no footprints in the snow leaving the house. They'd just gone back to their hiding spot. I turned around and looked into the dark cavern of the kitchen. The house was silent, but for the first time, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like a held breath. I wasn't alone.
After the police left, I sat in the kitchen for a long time, staring at the deadbolt. The metal was cold and unyielding, a simple mechanical device that had become the focal point of my unraveling sanity. The deputies had planted a seed of doubt that was rapidly blooming into a forest of paranoia. What if they were right? What if the stress of the move, the isolation, and the financial pressure had triggered a fugue state? I had read about people doing complex things while asleep, driving cars, cooking meals, unlocking doors. If I was the one terrorizing myself, then I was a danger to myself. I needed objective truth. I needed data. I didn't have a security system installed yet. The wiring in the house was too old for the smart home kit I'd bought, and I hadn't booked an electrician. But I had my phone. I downloaded one of those sleep tracking apps, the kind that records audio whenever it detects a spike in decibels.
I configured the sensitivity to high. If a floorboard creaked, if I coughed, if the wind rattled the pane, it would catch it. That night, I turned my bedroom into a bunker. I didn't just use a chair. I dragged a heavy oak dresser in front of the door. I checked the window locks 3 times. I checked the closet, empty save for a few hangers. I checked under the bed, nothing but dust bunnies. I was alone in a sealed box on the 2nd floor. I placed the phone on the nightstand, plugged it in, and hit start recording. The screen went black, a single red dot pulsating in the corner. "Good night," I whispered to the empty room. The app registered a spike. Voice detected. I barely slept. I lay there for hours, listening to the house groan in the wind. Every settling timber sounded like a footstep. Every gust of wind sounded like a scream. But eventually, exhaustion won. The human body can only run on adrenaline for so long before it crashes. I blacked out around 2 a.m. I woke up at 8 a.m. The room was freezing. I could see my breath in the air. My first thought was relief. I was alive. The dresser was still blocking the door. The windows were still latched. Nothing had moved. I reached for my phone. The battery was at 14%, drained by the constant background processing. I opened the app. The summary screen showed a graph of the night's noise levels. It was mostly flat, a low blue line representing the ambient silence of the snowstorm. There were a few small yellow spikes around 2:30 a.m., me tossing and turning probably. But then my eyes locked on the middle of the timeline. At 3:46 a.m., there was a massive red block, a solid wall of noise that lasted for 6 minutes. My stomach turned over. 6 minutes? Had I been screaming in my sleep? Had the storm broken a window? I tapped the play button. The audio started with the hiss of white noise, then the sound of rustling fabric, my duvet. I heard a soft moan, my own voice, muttering something intelligible in a dream. Then silence for 10 seconds. And then the sound began. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't the wind. It was a click. The same wet, sharp sound I had heard in the hallway on the 2nd night, like a tongue sucking against teeth. Click. Then a low, vibrating hum. It sounded like a cat purring, but deeper, much deeper. It was a chesty, rattling sound. Breathing. I held the phone to my ear, my hand shaking so bad I almost dropped it. The breathing was loud, too loud. If the phone was on my nightstand and I was in bed, the microphone should have picked up my breathing as the primary source. But this breathing was louder than mine. It was dominating the audio track. Inhale, wheeze, exhale. It sounded wet, congested, like someone with a sinus infection or someone trying to be quiet and failing because their lungs were ruined. I scrubbed forward in the recording, 3:44 a.m. The breathing didn't move. It didn't get closer or further away. It was stationary. And then at 3:45 a.m., a voice. It was barely a whisper, a sibilant hiss that cut through the white noise like a razor. It was so close to the microphone that the audio peaked and distorted. Pretty. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the duvet at the foot of the bed and bounced off onto the floor. I scrambled backward, pressing my back against the headboard, hyperventilating. Pretty. Someone had been in the room. Someone had stood right next to the nightstand. They had stood over me while I slept. They were inches from my face. I looked at the dresser barricading the door. It hadn't moved. The pile of laundry on top of it was undisturbed. I looked at the windows, painted shut. I looked at the closet door. It was closed. My mind was racing, trying to find a logical explanation, but the logic was broken. The physics were impossible. To get to the nightstand, they would have had to walk through the dresser, or... I looked up. The ceiling of the bedroom was 12 feet high, stamped tin in a Victorian pattern. In the corner, directly above the nightstand, there was a small square access hatch for the attic. It was painted over, blending in with the molding. I hadn't even noticed it when I moved in. As I stared at it, a single flake of dried white paint drifted down, spiraling slowly through the freezing air. It landed on the nightstand, right where my phone had been. The hatch was slightly askew, maybe a quarter of an inch. The breathing hadn't come from the hallway. It hadn't come from the door. It had come from above. I wasn't just living in a house with a squatter. I was living in a house where the walls and ceilings were a highway, and he had been commuting into my bedroom every night to watch me sleep.
I didn't stay in the bedroom. I didn't even pack a bag. The moment the realization hit me that the breathing on the recording had come from the ceiling, from the attic hatch directly above my head, a primal flight response took over. I scrambled off the bed, staying low, practically crawling across the floor. I felt like a prey animal in an open field, expecting talons to snatch me up at any second. I shoved the dresser aside with a strength I didn't know I possessed, the heavy oak screeching against the floorboards. I threw the door open and sprinted into the hallway, clutching the baseball bat I'd kept under the bed. I backed into the corner of the landing, bat raised, eyes darting between the bedroom door and the dark, yawning mouth of the staircase. The house was silent. The smiling guest, if that's what my mind was calling him now, wasn't making a sound. That was almost worse. He knew I was awake. He knew I had heard the recording. I couldn't leave. The car was buried under 4 feet of snow and ice. The nearest neighbor was 3 miles away. If I ran into the woods, I'd die of exposure in an hour. I was trapped in the cage with the tiger. "Come out!" I screamed, my voice shaking uncontrollably. "I know you're here! The police are on their way!" It was a lie. I hadn't called them back. They wouldn't come for a ghostly voice on an app. They'd come for a body, or they'd come for an intruder I could physically point to. I needed proof. I needed to know where he was. The attic was the obvious answer, but the thought of climbing that narrow pull-down ladder, exposing my head and torso to the darkness above while my legs dangled below, I couldn't do it. It was suicide. But the smell on the first floor near the intake vent was the anchor. That vent was the lungs of the house. If he was in the attic, why was the smell strongest downstairs? I gripped the bat tighter and descended the stairs, keeping my back to the wall. Every shadow looked like a man. Every coat rack looked like a figure waiting to strike. I made it to the hallway with the intake vent. The cardboard I'd taped over it was still there, but the stench had intensified. It was nauseating now, a thick, humid miasma of decay. I stopped and looked at the wall. It was a load-bearing wall, thick and central to the house structure. On this side was the hallway. On the other side was the game room, a space I had barely touched, filled with the previous owner's left-behind heavy furniture. I tried to visualize the floor plan. If the wall was 12 inches thick... Wait, I walked to the doorframe of the game room. I paced the length of the wall inside the room. Then I went back to the hallway and paced it again. The math didn't work. The hallway wall was flush. The game room wall was flush. But there was a 4-foot discrepancy between the doorframe of the game room and where the interior wall began. There was a void. A dead space in the center of the house, sandwiched between the hallway and the game room. I ran into the game room. Against that shared wall stood a massive floor-to-ceiling mahogany wardrobe. It was a beast of a piece, probably built into the house in the 1920s. It was filled with old board games and moth-eaten blankets. I approached it. The smell here was faint, masked by the dust, but there was a draft. A cold, steady stream of air coming from the gap between the wardrobe and the floor. I got down on my hands and knees. The floorboards didn't stop at the front of the wardrobe. They continued under it, and on the wood leading under the heavy furniture were scratches,
deep parallel gouges in the varnish. Someone had been moving this thing. "Okay," I whispered. "Okay." I stood up, positioned my shoulder against the side of the wardrobe, and pushed. It didn't budge. It must have weighed 300 pounds. I braced my feet against the baseboard, gritted my teeth, and shoved with everything I had. My boots slipped, then caught. A vein popped in my forehead. Screech! The sound was like a gunshot in the quiet house. The wardrobe slid 3 inches to the right. I gasped for air and pushed again. Screech! Another 6 inches. I peered into the gap I had created. There was no drywall behind the wardrobe. The back of the furniture had been removed, and the drywall of the house had been sawed away, leaving a jagged, gaping rectangular hole about 3 feet high. Darkness poured out of it, along with a stench so powerful it made my eyes water instantly. It was the concentrated essence of the smell from the vent: feces, rotting food, and stale, recycled air. I shined my flashlight into the hole. It wasn't just a hole. It was a crawl space, a narrow service chase that ran between the walls, carrying the plumbing and ductwork up through the center of the house. It was maybe 2 feet wide, lined with insulation and cobwebs. But it wasn't empty. A set of wooden planks had been laid across the floor joists to create a makeshift walkway. The insulation had been torn away to make room for movement. I leaned closer, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs. The beam of my light cut through the dusty gloom. The passage went up. A crude ladder made of 2x4s was nailed to the studs, disappearing into the darkness of the second floor, right toward the attic. And at the base of the ladder, just inside the wall, sat a pair of muddy boots. They were facing me. I held my breath, waiting for the boots to move, waiting for legs to appear above them. But they were empty. He had taken them off to move silently. I squeezed through the gap. I shouldn't have done it. I should have run out the front door and frozen to death in the snow. But curiosity is a disease, and I was terminal. I stepped on the planks inside the wall. I was standing in the veins of the house. To my left, the passage widened slightly into a small alcove, hidden directly behind the fireplace chimney. I turned the light. "Oh my God," I choked out. It wasn't just a passage. It was a lair.
I stepped fully into the wall. The space was tight, maybe 2 feet wide, sandwiched between the studwork of the hallway and the brick of the chimney chase. It was a suffocating, vertical coffin lined with pink fiberglass insulation that snagged on my clothes like cotton candy made of glass. The smell here wasn't just a drift anymore. It was an atmosphere. It was a physical weight pressing against my face, a stinging cocktail of ammonia, stale sweat, and that cloying, sweet scent of rotting biological matter. I pulled my shirt up over my nose, gagging, tears streaming from my eyes, and aimed the flashlight beam into the alcove behind the fireplace. What I saw there will be etched into the backs of my eyelids until the day I die. It was a nest. There is no other word for it. It was a human rat's nest. A filthy, twin-sized mattress had been shoved into the widening of the crawl space. It was stained yellow and brown, the fabric torn to reveal the foam beneath. Piled around it like a hoard were mountains of trash, wrappers from my granola bars, the empty milk jug I thought I had poured out, apple cores turned to brown mush, and cans of tuna that had been licked clean. He hadn't just been stealing food, he had been hoarding it, living off my supplies like a parasite. But it was the shelving that made my knees buckle. Along the studs, where the insulation had been ripped away, he had nailed up rows of wooden planks. On these makeshift shelves sat dozens of mason jars. They were filled with amber liquid, ranging from pale yellow to dark orange. Some were capped, some were open, letting the fumes drift up into the house's ventilation system.
He had been pissing in jars. He had been living inside the walls of this house, right next to the heating ducts, without running water or a toilet for God knows how long. The discipline required to live like that, to live like an animal in absolute silence just to avoid detection, was terrifying. I stepped closer, my boots crunching on something brittle. I looked down. Chicken bones. Thousands of them. Then I swept the light up. Above the mattress, taped directly to the backside of the hallway drywall, was a collage. At first, my brain refused to process it. I thought it was just clutter, pages from magazines, flyers, junk. But as I leaned in, the flashlight beam trembling in my hand, the images sharpened. They were Polaroids. There were hundreds of them, a mosaic of voyeurism. The first one I focused on was grainy and dark. It showed a figure lying in a sleeping bag on a hardwood floor. The angle was high, taken from above. From the chandelier mount? No, from the balcony railing. It was me. It was me on my first night in the house. I moved the light to the next one. Me in the kitchen, eating cereal. The photo was taken through the gap in the intake vent. I could see the blurry grate in the foreground. The next one, me in the shower. The photo was taken through a crack in the bathroom ceiling. My stomach heaved. I swallowed down the bile rising in my throat. He had been watching me every second, every private moment, every vulnerability. He knew my routine better than I did. But the photos weren't just of me. To the left of my section, there were older photos, a family, a mother, a father, 2 teenage girls. They were smiling at a dinner table. Then, photos of them sleeping. Then, photos of them broken. I won't describe those. I can't, but they were taken after. And in the center of this shrine, pinned with the reverence of a religious icon, were newspaper clippings. They were yellowed, brittle, stripped from local papers and national tabloids. The night carver strikes again, family of 4 slain in Vermont. Who is the guest, police baffled by phantom killer? No forced entry, the terrifying MO of the Midwest's most wanted. I read the text of one clipping, my eyes scanning the blurred ink frantically. Police believe the suspect enters homes weeks or months before the crimes occur, hiding in attics, crawl spaces, or basements. He lives alongside the families, learning their schedules, eating their food, and watching them sleep. He documents his stay with photographs. He calls himself the guest. He does not leave until the house is empty of life. I dropped the flashlight. It clattered against the wood, the beam spinning wildly before settling on a specific object sitting on a crate next to the mattress. It was a spiral-bound notebook. I picked it up, my hands shaking so violently I could barely turn the pages. It was a log, a diary. November 2. The new one moved in. He is alone. Good. The family was too loud. He is quiet. I like him. November 3. He hears me. He thinks it is the wind. He is stupid. He sleeps on the floor like a dog. November 5. I touched his hair while he slept. Soft. He smells like soap. I want to peel him. November 6th. The storm is coming. We will be snowed in together. Just us. It is time to play. The last entry was dated today. November 7th. He found the smell. He is getting close. I am bored of watching. Tonight, I will introduce myself. I stared at the words. Tonight. A drop of liquid hit the page. I touched my face, thinking I was sweating, but my forehead was dry. I looked at the page again. Another drop landed. Plip. It was warm. I slowly tilted my head back to look up toward the ceiling of the crawlspace, toward the floorboards of the second story directly below me. Through a gap in the subflooring, a single blue eye was staring down at me. It crinkled. He was smiling.
I didn't scream. Screaming requires air, and at that moment my lungs felt like they had been filled with wet cement. I just stared up at that single, unblinking blue eye peering through the crack in the ceiling boards. It was suspended in the darkness of the interfloor void, lit only by the upward cast of my flashlight. The skin around the eye crinkled again, the flesh bunching up. He wasn't just smiling, he was laughing, a silent, vibrating mirth that I couldn't hear but could feel radiating down through the dust. Then the eye vanished. The floorboards above me groaned, a long, agonizing shriek of old wood under heavy weight. Dust and sawdust rained down onto my face, stinging my eyes. Thump. He moved. Thump, thump, thump. The sound wasn't the tentative creeping I'd heard on the recording. It was fast, heavy, purposeful. He was moving away from the hole in the subfloor, heading toward the attic hatch in the master bedroom? No. I listened, my heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the walls of my chest. Thump, thump. He was heading for the hallway. He was heading for the stairs. Panic, hot and blinding, finally kick-started my nervous system. I wasn't the hunter discovering a nest anymore. I was a rat caught in a trap, and the exterminator was coming down the only exit route. I scrambled backward. "Move, move, move!" I hissed through gritted teeth. I crab-walked backward through the narrow crawlspace, my elbows banging painfully against the studs. The insulation tore at my clothes, the fiberglass itching and burning my skin. I kicked out wildly, my boots slipping on the slick, trash-covered floor of the lair. My hand slapped down onto the crate next to the mattress to brace myself, and I recoiled with a yelp. I shone the light on what I had touched. It was a mug, a chipped, dirty ceramic mug filled with black liquid. Steam was rising from it. I froze for a split second, the horror of that simple thermodynamic fact washing over me. The coffee wasn't just warm, it was hot. He hadn't been hiding in the attic all day. He had been down here. He had been sitting on this mattress, sipping coffee, listening to me pace around the game room. He had been inches away from me when I pushed the wardrobe. He didn't flee to the attic because he was afraid. He went up there to get behind me. He went up there to cut off my escape. He had baited me into the wall. I threw myself backward with renewed desperation, scraping my scalp on a nail protruding from a joist. I didn't care. I shimmied through the gap behind the wardrobe, tumbling out of the wall and spilling onto the floor of the game room like a newborn animal, blind, gasping, and covered in filth. I rolled to my feet, my flashlight beam wildly slashing across the room. The house was dead silent again. I held my breath, straining to hear him. Had he stopped? Was he waiting on the landing? Then, from the foyer, clear, distinct, and terrifyingly casual, came the sound. Creak. The bottom step of the main staircase. He was down. He was on the ground floor. I was trapped in the game room. The only way out was the doorway that led directly into the foyer, directly to him. I looked around frantically for a weapon. The game room was full of harmless things, board games, a dusty pool table, soft chairs. I grabbed the heavy brass fireplace poker from the hearth. It felt cold and solid in my grip, but against a man who had been living in my walls, sharpening his hate for months, it felt like a toothpick. "Hello?" The voice came from the hallway. It wasn't the whisper from the app. It was a normal voice, a calm baritone voice. It sounded like a neighbor asking to borrow sugar. It sounded human, which made it infinitely worse. "I know you found my room. It's not very polite to go through people's things, David." He knew my name. Of course he knew my name. He'd probably read my mail. He'd probably watched me sign the deed. I backed away from the door, retreating toward the windows. "Stay back!" I shouted. My voice sounded thin, bordering on hysterical. "I have a gun! I've called the police!" A low chuckle drifted from the hallway.
"You don't have a gun, David. You have a baseball bat, but you left it in the hallway when you crawled into the wall. And the police, they didn't believe you the first time. Why would they come now?" He stepped into the doorway. I saw him for the first time. He wasn't a monster. He wasn't a ghost. He was a man, maybe 40. He was wearing dirty gray sweatpants and a thick, oversized wool sweater that I recognized. It was mine. He was wearing my clothes. He was barefoot, his toenails long and yellow. His face was gaunt, pale as the snow outside, with a patchy beard that couldn't hide the sharp angles of his jaw. But it was his eyes, those pale, unblinking blue eyes, and the smile that froze my blood. It was a wide, fixed grin, too wide, like the skin was pulled too tight. He was holding something in his right hand, a heavy, rusted iron crowbar. "You look cold." He tapped the crowbar against his leg. Tap, tap, tap. "Your house? No, David. You just pay the bills. I live here." He took another step into the room. I scrambled backward, hitting the pool table. "I swear to God, I'll kill you." "Language," he tutted. He took another step. He was blocking the only exit. I glanced at the windows. They were storm windows, double-paned glass with heavy latches, buried under feet of snow on the outside. Even if I broke the glass, I'd have to crawl through shards and snow while he swung that crowbar at my spine. "I'm not going to hurt you," he said, his smile widening, showing gray teeth. "Not yet. We haven't played the game yet." "What game?" I choked out. "Hide and seek," he whispered. He reached his hand out toward the wall switch by the door. "But first," he said, his fingers hovering over the toggle, "we need to set the mood." I realized what he was doing a second too late. I lunged forward, but he was faster. He flipped the switch, but the light didn't just turn off in the room. Across the house, I heard the heavy thunk of the main breaker panel tripping in the basement. The hum of the refrigerator died. The faint glow of the landscape lights outside vanished. The house plunged into absolute pitch blackness.
The darkness wasn't instantaneous. It was an assault. When the breaker tripped, the heavy thud from the basement vibrated through the floorboards, and the room didn't just go black, it ceased to exist. The afterimage of his smiling face, illuminated by the dying bulb, burned in my retinas for a split second. That wide, skin-tight grin, the crowbar raised, the dirty sweater hanging off his gaunt frame. Then, nothing. Just the suffocating, heavy silence of a house that had suddenly lost its pulse. I froze. I didn't breathe. I didn't blink. My brain was screaming, "Run!" but my body was locked in a paralysis of absolute terror. I was standing in a pitch-black room with a serial killer who had just told me he wanted to play a game, and he was standing less than 10 feet away, blocking the only door. I gripped the fireplace poker so hard my knuckles popped. I waited for the rush. I waited for the impact of the iron bar crushing my skull. But it didn't come. Instead, I heard movement, not toward me, but away. Swish, swish. The soft sound of fabric rubbing against fabric, then the creak of the floorboards in the hallway. He had left the doorway. My hand flew to the flashlight I was still clutching in my left hand. I thumbed the switch. The beam cut through the dark like a lightsaber, blindingly bright against the dust motes. I swung it wildly toward the door. Empty. He was gone. In the 3 seconds of darkness, he had moved with the silent agility of a spider. "David." The voice drifted from the darkness of the hallway. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was singing, a low, off-key hum that reverberated off the high ceilings. I stepped out of the game room, leading with the flashlight, swinging the poker in jerky, terrified arcs. The beam swept the foyer. The grand staircase loomed to my right, ascending into the black void of the second floor. To my left, the kitchen. Then, the whistling started. It came from the kitchen. It was a slow, leisurely tune. Pop goes the weasel. But he dragged out the notes, slowing the tempo down until it sounded like a funeral dirge. Do, do, pop goes the weasel. He wasn't attacking. He was herding me. He had cleared the path to the stairs. He wanted me to go upstairs. He wanted me trapped on the second floor. I knew it was a trap. I knew that if I went upstairs, I was cornering myself. But what choice did I have? The front door was right there in the foyer, but it had 3 locks, a deadbolt, a chain, and a handle lock. Fumbling with them in the dark would take 10 seconds. 10 seconds with my back to the kitchen. 10 seconds for him to cross the foyer and bury that crowbar in my spine. I couldn't risk it. I ran for the stairs. I took them 3 at a time, my boots slamming against the wood, the flashlight beam jerking violently with every step. I expected him to chase. I expected to hear the thundering of footsteps behind me. But as I reached the landing, gasping for air, I stopped and spun around, shining the light down into the foyer. Nothing. Just the empty, cavernous entrance hall. And the whistling. It hadn't changed tempo. He was still in the kitchen. He wasn't even pursuing me. He was letting me run. He's enjoying this, I realized with a sick lurch in my stomach. This isn't a fight for him. It's dinner theater. I backed away from the railing, the darkness of the upstairs hallway pressing in on me. The air up here was colder, freezing. The heat from the fireplace hadn't reached this high. I needed a fortress, the master bedroom. It had the heaviest door, it had the furniture I could use as a barricade, and most importantly, my phone charger and the window that led to the porch roof, my only potential exit if things went south. I sprinted down the hall. My flashlight beam swept over the closed doors of the guest rooms. They looked like teeth in a mouth. I reached the master bedroom and threw myself inside, slamming the door behind me. I fumbled for the lock. Click. It was a flimsy privacy lock, a determined toddler could kick it open. I grabbed the heavy oak dresser, the same one I had moved earlier, and dragged it back in front of the door. The legs screeched against the floor. I threw a nightstand on top of it. I grabbed the chair and jammed it under the handle. Safe, I wheezed, backing away until my legs hit the bed. Safe. The word tasted like ash. I wasn't safe. I was just contained. I aimed the flashlight at the door, watching the handle. Silence. Then, from the other side of the door, right against the wood, I heard a sound that stopped my heart. Scrape. Metal on wood. He was dragging the tip of the crowbar across the door panel. He had come up the stairs silently. He had walked down the hall without making a sound, and now he was standing right there. Open up, David. His voice was muffled by the wood, but it was calm, conversational. It's rude to lock out your guests. I didn't answer. I couldn't. He was making coffee. It's fresh. Scrape, scrape. You know, he continued, and I could hear the smile in his voice, I used to sleep in this room before you came. The bed is very comfortable, but the mattress in the wall, it has better acoustics. I can hear everything from there. I heard you crying about your girlfriend last week. Sarah, was it? Tears pricked my eyes. He had heard my phone calls. He had heard me sobbing on the floor the first night. She didn't deserve you, David. You're special. You have good bones. Thud. The door jumped in its frame. He had hit it, not hard enough to break it, but hard enough to let me know he could. I'm going to huff, and I'm going to puff, he whispered. I looked at the window. It was my only way out, but outside, the storm was still raging, and the drop from the porch roof to the ground was 15 feet into a snowdrift. I looked back at the door. The handle was slowly beginning to turn. The lock clicked against the strain. The chair groaned. He wasn't breaking in yet. He was testing the integrity of my cage. He was checking the latches before he started to shake the bars. And then the whistling started again, right against the crack of the door jamb. Do, do, do. He was waiting.
He had nowhere to be. He had all night, and I had nowhere to go.
The whistling stopped. That was worse than the sound. As long as he was whistling, I knew where he was. I knew he was standing on the other side of that pine door, a physical entity occupying a specific point in space. But when the whistling died, the silence that rushed in to fill the void was terrified and expansive. It allowed my imagination to populate the darkness with 1,000 different horrors. I didn't move from the bed. I sat there gripping the fireplace poker with white-knuckled intensity, the flashlight beam fixed unwaveringly on the door handle. My breath was coming in short, jagged gasps, misting in the freezing air. With the power cut, the house was shedding heat rapidly. The master bedroom, with its high ceilings and drafty windows, was already becoming a meat locker. I watched the brass knob. It was still. The chair I'd jammed under it was digging into the carpet. The backrest bowed slightly under the tension. The dresser and nightstand I'd piled up formed a chaotic, desperate barricade. He can't get in, I told myself. Physics is on my side. Even with a crowbar, he can't push through 300 pounds of furniture without making a hell of a lot of noise. But then the thought curdled. He doesn't have to get in. He had the breaker off. He had the food. He had the run of the house. All he had to do was sit in the hallway, wrapped in my sweaters, and wait for the hypothermia to do the work for him. I was the one trapped in a box. He was the one with the keys to the cage. Scrape. The sound came from the floorboards, directly at the threshold of the door. I tensed, raising the poker. "I'm warning you," I shouted, my voice sounding ragged. "I'll kill you if you come in." "Shh." His voice came through the crack at the bottom of the door. It was low, intimate, pressing against the floor. He was lying down. He was lying on his stomach in the hallway, his face pressed against the gap between the door and the floor. "You're gonna need it to stay warm. It's gonna be a 3-dog night." Then a sound I couldn't identify, a soft swish like paper sliding over wood. Something white appeared in the gap beneath the door. He pushed it through with a finger. It slid across the hardwood floor of the bedroom and came to rest a few feet from the barricade. It was a Polaroid. I didn't want to look at it. I wanted to close my eyes and wait for the sun, but the need to know, the need to understand the threat was a physical itch. I kept the flashlight trained on the door, shuffling sideways until I could reach the photo with the tip of the poker. I dragged it across the floor toward me, never taking my eyes off the barricade. I picked it up. The photo was fresh. The chemicals still smelled sharp. It was a picture of my car keys. They were dangling from a dirty, calloused finger, his finger. The background was the kitchen counter. "I found them in the bowl," he said through the door. "You're very organized. Tape on the ceramic? Clever, but not clever enough." My heart sank. The keys, my only way out of here once the storm broke. He had them. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, the question escaping me before I could stop it. "What do you want?" "I want to see what you do," he simply replied. "People are so honest when they're afraid. The family before you, the Millers, they were loud, screaming, bargaining, praying, boring. But you're quiet. You think. I like that." I heard him shift his weight. The floorboards in the hall creaked. "I'm going to give you a head start. I'm going to go downstairs and make a sandwich, ham and Swiss, your ham, your Swiss. I'll give you 20 minutes to figure out your next move. If you're still in the room when I come back, well, I have a fire axe in the garage, and this door is only wood, David." Thump. Thump, thump. His footsteps retreated down the hall, heavy,
deliberate. He made no effort to be quiet. He wanted me to hear him leaving. He wanted me to feel the false hope of a reprieve. I scrambled up. 20 minutes. I ran to the window. I unlocked the latch and shoved the sash up. It didn't budge. Ice had sealed the frame shut from the outside. I slammed the heel of my hand against the top of the frame, grunting with effort. Bang! Bang! It gave way with a crack of shattering ice. I pushed it open, a blast of wind and snow instantly assaulting me. I leaned out, shining the light down. The drop was terrifying. The porch roof was 5 feet below the window, covered in a slick, treacherous sheet of ice. Beyond that, the ground was a white abyss. If I jumped to the roof, I'd likely slide right off and break a leg in the driveway. And a broken leg in a blizzard with a killer on the loose was a death sentence. I pulled back inside, slamming the window shut and locking it. No, the roof was a last resort, a suicide run. I turned back to the room, sweeping the flashlight beam across my prison. There had to be something, a weapon, a tool. My eyes landed on the ceiling. The attic hatch. My blood ran cold. The recording from part 6. The breathing had come from above. The killer used the crawl spaces in the attic as a highway. I was barricading the door, but I had left the ceiling wide open. He wasn't going to the kitchen for a sandwich. He wasn't going to the garage to get the axe. No, that was a lie. He was going to the other access point. He was going to circle around. He was going to come down from the attic. I looked at the hatch. It was a simple plywood square resting on a lip of molding. No lock, no latch. Gravity was the only thing holding it in place. No, 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 I whispered. I dragged the nightstand off the dresser, throwing it onto the bed. I needed height. I stood on the mattress, reaching up with the fireplace poker. I poked the hatch. It lifted easily, too easily. If he came through there, he would drop right onto the bed, right onto me. I needed to jam it. I looked around frantically. I grabbed the heavy, solid wood chair I had used to wedge the door handle. I dragged it onto the bed. The door was now unwedged, held only by the dresser and the flimsy lock, but I had to prioritize. The door would take time to break down. The hatch was instant access. I stood on the bed, balancing the heavy chair over my head. My plan was to wedge the legs of the chair against the ceiling molding and the hatch, creating pressure. As I reached up, my flashlight beam cut across the gap in the hatch I had just pushed open. Something moved in the darkness of the attic. It wasn't a rat. It was pale. A hand. It shot out of the darkness, grabbing the edge of the hatch opening. Fingers dirty, nails broken and yellow. He wasn't in the kitchen. He was already up there. He had been up there the whole time. "Found you," a voice whispered from the ceiling, and then the hatch was ripped upward into the darkness, and a face appeared in the square hole, upside down, smiling that terrible skin-tight smile.
Gravity is a funny thing. You spend your whole life trusting it, relying on the fact that threats come from the horizon, not the sky. But when a face hangs upside down from your ceiling, grinning with teeth that look like broken tombstones, your understanding of the world snaps. I didn't scream this time. The terror was too absolute for noise. I just scrambled backward, my boots slipping on the duvet, and fell off the bed. I hit the floor hard, my flashlight spinning away, creating a strobing, chaotic light show that illuminated the hatch in flashes. Light, dark. The face, dark. The smile, dark. "Peekaboo!" The voice dripped from the ceiling. It wasn't whispering anymore. It was giddy. I grabbed the flashlight and crab-walked into the corner of the room, jamming my back against the radiator. I swept the beam up. The hatch was wide open, a rectangular maw of blackness. He hadn't dropped down. He was still up there, crouching on the joists, just his head and one arm visible. He looked like a gargoyle perched on the edge of a nightmare.
"You're not very good at this, David," he said, his voice echoing slightly in the attic space before drifting down. "Barricading the door? Really? That's two-dimensional thinking. We live in a 3D world." "What do you want?" I rasped, gripping the fireplace poker with both hands. "Money? My car? Take it. Just let me go." He laughed. It was a wet, rattling sound, like marbles rolling around in a tin can. "Money?" he mocked. "I have no use for money. I don't pay rent. I don't buy groceries. I have you for that. You buy the expensive cheese. I like the expensive cheese, David." He shifted, his head withdrawing slightly into the shadows, though his hand remained gripping the molding of the hatch. "We're going to play a game. It's called eviction. The rules are simple. You have to leave the house. If you leave the house and make it to the main road, you win. I disappear. I find a new host, maybe that nice couple down in the valley." "And if I lose?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Well," he purred, "then I get to keep you. I've been lonely. The Millers, they didn't last long. They were fragile. But you have endurance." I looked at the window. The ice on the sill was thick. The drop was dangerous. But staying in this room with a predator in the ceiling was suicide. "You're bluffing," I said, trying to inject a bravado I didn't feel. "You're not coming down here. It's a 12-foot drop. You'd break your ankles." "True," he conceded. "I have bad knees, old football injury, high school. I was a quarterback, believe it or not." The banality of the statement made my skin crawl. He was a monster, but he was also just a guy who remembered high school football while hunting a human being. "So no, I won't come down, but I can make you come out." "I'm not coming out," I shouted. "I'm staying right here until the police come." "The police aren't coming, David. The lines are down. The roads are closed. And even if they were coming, they wouldn't get here in time." He pulled his hand back. For a second, I thought he was leaving. Then a sound came from the attic, the strike of a match. Psst! A flare of orange light illuminated the hole in the ceiling, casting long, dancing shadows across the bedroom floor. "Fire is a beautiful thing," he mused. "It cleanses, it warms, it consumes." "You won't," I stammered. "You'll burn yourself, too. You're trapped in the attic." "Am I?" he asked. "I have 4 ways out of this roof. You have 1 window that's frozen shut. And this house, oh, David, this house is 80 years of dry timber, horsehair plaster, and dust. It's a tinderbox waiting for a spark." He held the match over the opening. I watched the flame flicker, mesmerizing and deadly. "I'm not going to burn the house down," he said, blowing the match out. The darkness returned instantly. "That would be a waste of a good roof, but I am going to smoke you out, literally." He dropped something through the hatch. It was a heavy, blackened rag, soaked in something pungent. It landed on the bed with a wet thud. The smell hit me instantly, ammonia, bleach, and something burning. "Chemistry is fun," he called down. "Don't breathe too deep. That mix will turn your lungs to soup in about, 5 minutes, maybe less in a closed room." Smoke began to curl off the rag. It wasn't fire smoke. It was a chemical reaction, a thick yellow-white plume that hissed as it rose. I coughed. One breath and my throat felt like I'd swallowed razor blades. My eyes started to water instantly. "The clock is ticking, David," he sang out, his voice retreating from the hatch. "I'll be waiting in the hallway, or maybe the stairs, or maybe the kitchen. Who knows? That's the fun part." He slammed the hatch cover back into place. The room plunged into silence, broken only by the angry hiss of the chemical rag on the bed. I was sealed in. The dresser blocked the door. The hatch was closed, and the room was filling with a toxic, blinding fog. I scrambled up, pulling my shirt over my nose. My eyes were burning so badly I could barely keep them open. The air was turning acrid, thick, and unbreathable. I had to move. I had to choose. The window, a terrifying drop into darkness and ice, or the door, leading into the pitch-black house where he was waiting with a crowbar and a smile. I looked at the window, then I looked at the door. He expected me to run. He expected me to panic and stumble into his arms in the hallway. I grabbed the fireplace poker. I grabbed the flashlight. I wasn't going to die choking in a bedroom. If I was going to die, I was going to die on my feet. I kicked the chair away from the door. I threw my shoulder against the dresser, shoving it inch by agonizing inch, coughing violently as the yellow smoke swirled around my head. The game was on.
The yellow smoke was a physical weight. It didn't just fill the room, it clung to my skin, burned my eyes, and tasted like battery acid. I was coughing so hard I was retching, dry heaving against the back of the dresser as I shoved it inch by agonizing inch across the hardwood floor. My vision was gone. I was operating on touch and memory. Push, grunt, cough, push. The dresser cleared the frame. I didn't wait to check the hallway. I didn't pause to listen. I threw the door open and stumbled out, collapsing onto the runner rug in the corridor. The air in the hallway was freezing, a sharp, shocking contrast to the chemical heat of the bedroom. I gulped it down, my lungs screaming in protest. I rolled onto my back, swinging the flashlight wildly, the beam cutting through the wisps of smoke that were billowing out of the bedroom door like a spectral fog. "David!" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere. I scrambled to my feet, gripping the fireplace poker with sweaty, trembling hands. I aimed the light down the long, dark tunnel of the hallway toward the stairs. Empty. I spun around, aiming toward the spare bedrooms. Empty. He wasn't waiting at the door. He wasn't waiting to club me the second I emerged. He was playing with his food. "Where are you?" I screamed, the sound tearing at my raw throat. "Over here," the voice whispered. It came from the darkness behind the smoke, back near the master bedroom door I had just exited. I swung the light back. He was standing in the doorway of the bedroom I had just fled. He was standing inside the smoke. He wasn't coughing. He wasn't covering his face. He stood there, silhouetted by the yellow haze, his figure gaunt and terrifying. He was wearing a gas mask, an old rubber industrial mask with a single canister. It made him look like an insect, a giant predatory insect. He tilted his head. The mask magnified his breathing, turning it into a mechanical, rasping growl. He stepped into the hallway. In his right hand, the crowbar was gone. He was holding a fire axe. The red paint on the handle was chipped. The blade was dull and rusted. "Run," he said. The voice was muffled by the rubber, deep and distorted. I didn't need telling twice. I turned and sprinted for the stairs. My boots thundered on the floorboards. I reached the landing in 3 seconds, adrenaline flooding my system with a power I didn't know I had. I grabbed the newel post to swing myself around for the descent. Wham! Something heavy hit me in the chest. I flew backward, landing hard on my tailbone, the breath knocked out of me. My flashlight skittered across the floor, spinning wildly. I looked up. The killer wasn't behind me. He was in front of me. My brain stuttered. How? I had just seen him at the bedroom door. Then I realized there were 2 figures. No, mirrors. The hallway had a full-length mirror at the end. I had been looking at his reflection. He had been behind me the whole time, waiting in the shadows near the stairs. He stood over me now, looming tall in the flickering strobe of the spinning flashlight. He raised the axe. "Checkmate," he growled. I didn't think. I reacted. I kicked out with both legs, driving my boots into his knees.
He grunted, stumbling back. The axe swing went wide, the heavy steel head burying itself into the banister with a deafening crack, splintering the wood and sending shards flying. While he yanked the axe free, I scrambled on all fours, not down the stairs, he was blocking them, but back down the hallway, away from the exit. I was running deeper into the trap. "Bathroom!" my mind screamed. "The window!" I scrambled past the smoking bedroom, past the guest rooms, toward the bathroom at the far end of the hall. Behind me, I heard the heavy thump, drag of his run. He wasn't sprinting, he was loping. He knew I had nowhere to go. I threw myself into the bathroom, slamming the door and locking it. It was a hollow core door, cheap, flimsy. It offered about as much protection as a sheet of paper. I fumbled for the light switch, but the power was still out. I was in pitch blackness again. I felt my way to the sink, then the toilet, then the window. Bam! The first blow hit the door. The wood splintered around the lock. "Here's Johnny," he mocked, the voice distorted and buzzing through the mask. Bam! The top hinge popped. The door hung crookedly. I grabbed the window latches. They were frozen, just like the bedroom. "Come on, come on," I sobbed, hammering the latch with the heavy brass base of the fireplace poker, which I had somehow held on to. Crack! The latch broke. I shoved the window up. It slid open, revealing the howling night. The wind blasted in, carrying snow and ice. Behind me, the bathroom door exploded inward. I didn't look back. I climbed onto the toilet, threw my leg over the sill, and scrambled out into the storm. I landed on the porch roof. It was a sloped sheet of ice. My feet went out from under me instantly. I slid down, my fingernails clawing uselessly at the shingles buried under the snow. I was sliding toward the edge, toward the 15-foot drop onto the concrete driveway. "No, no, no!" I slammed the point of the fireplace poker into the roof. It punched through the ice and bit into the wood below. I jolted to a halt, my legs dangling over the edge of the roof. I looked down. The black void of the yard swirled below me. I pulled myself up, gasping, shaking, clinging to the fireplace poker like an anchor. I looked back at the window I had just exited. The killer was there. He leaned out into the storm, the gas mask looking grotesque in the moonlight, reflecting on the snow. He looked at me, dangling on the edge of the roof. He didn't climb out. He didn't throw the axe. He reached up and grabbed the window sash. "Chilly night," he shouted over the wind. And then he slammed the window shut. I stared at him through the glass. He locked it. He waved his fingers at me, a mock goodbye, and then he turned and walked away, disappearing into the dark house. I was alone on the roof, in a blizzard, dressed in jeans and a hoodie. And then I heard it, the sound coming from beneath me, from the porch directly under the roof I had just exited, the sound of a window opening on the first floor. He wasn't leaving me to freeze. He was coming out to catch me when I fell.
I hung there, suspended in the violent gray limbo between the roof and the ground, clutching the brass handle of the fireplace poker like it was the hand of God. The wind battered me, stinging my face with ice crystals that felt like sandblasted glass. My fingers were already numb, losing the battle against the freezing metal. Below me, the porch was a dark cavern mouth. I couldn't see him, but I could hear him. The groan of the downstairs window sash sliding up, the crunch of boots on the wood decking. He was directly underneath me. He was waiting. It was the ultimate goalkeeper move. He knew I couldn't climb back up the icy roof. He knew gravity was his teammate. All he had to do was wait for my grip to fail, watch me tumble 15 feet onto the concrete or the frozen earth, and then finish the job with that rusted axe while I lay broken in the snow. I looked at the poker driven into the ice.
It was loosening. The wood beneath the shingles was soft, rotting. It wiggled with every gust of wind. I had seconds. I didn't want to die. The realization wasn't profound or poetic. It was angry. I was furious. I was furious that this man, this squatter in my house, this thief of my life, was going to win because he had better shoes and a gas mask. Don't fall, I told myself. Jump. If I fell, I was a rag doll. If I jumped, I was a projectile. I pulled my knees up, bracing my boots against the slippery shingles. I took a breath that tasted of ozone and snow. I listened to the footsteps below stop. He was positioning himself. "Come on down, David," he shouted, his voice muffled but mocking. "I promised to catch you." I ripped the poker free from the roof. I didn't slide. I pushed off. I launched myself backward, away from the safety of the roof, twisting my body in the air. The fall felt endless and instant at the same time. I didn't hit the porch. I cleared the railing, thank God for the adrenaline, and slammed into the snowbank alongside the house. The impact was brutal. The snow was 4 feet deep, but it had a crust of ice on top. It shattered, and I plunged through, hitting the frozen ground beneath with a force that snapped my teeth together. I saw stars. My left shoulder screamed in agony, but I wasn't broken. I thrashed in the drift, gasping, trying to find up. The snow was suffocating, packing into my nose and mouth. Crunch, crunch, crunch. He was coming off the porch. He was coming into the snow. I exploded upward, coughing, spitting ice. He was right there. The gas mask looked like the giant fly in the darkness. He stood waist-deep in the snow, the axe resting casually on his shoulder. He wasn't rushing. He thought I was hurt. He thought he had time. "Come on down, David," he sighed, stepping forward. The snow dragged at his legs, slowing him down. "You're wet, you're freezing. You have about 10 minutes before hypothermia makes you sleepy. Let's go back inside. I'll make tea." He raised the axe, not to strike, but to herd me, to push me back towards the house. I waited. I waited until he took one more laborious step, lifting his leg high to clear the drift. His balance shifted. I lunged. I didn't swing the poker like a club. I used it like a spear. I drove the pointed brass tip forward with every ounce of strength left in my shivering body. He tried to bring the axe down, but the angle was wrong, and the snow hindered his movement. The poker hit him in the thigh. It tore through the dirty gray sweatpants, my sweatpants, and sank deep into the meat of his leg. He didn't scream. He roared, a guttural, animalistic sound that vibrated through the mask. He swung the axe wildly. The handle caught me in the ribs, sending me sprawling back into the snow. I heard a crack, a definite rib, and the pain was blinding. But I had heard him. He dropped to one knee, clutching his leg. The poker was still sticking out of his thigh. I scrambled away, crawling on my hands and knees through the powder. I needed distance. I needed the road. "You little bitch," he shrieked, ripping the poker out. Blood sprayed black in the moonlight, steaming against the white snow. He stood up. He was limping now, favoring the left leg, but the rage had replaced his calm demeanor. The game was over. He wasn't playing anymore. I made it to the driveway. It was a sheet of ice under the snow, but it was flatter. I forced myself to stand, clutching my side. I looked back. He was coming. He was lurching through the snow, dragging the axe, his breath coming in ragged, mechanical heaves. "I'm going to peel you," he screamed. "I'm going to peel you while you're awake." I turned and ran. I ran with a broken rib, a bruised shoulder, and lungs that felt like they were filled with broken glass. I ran towards the end of the driveway, towards the main road, praying that the plows had come. He was gaining. Even with the bad leg, he was driven by a maniacal chemical fury. I could hear his boots slapping the ice behind me. I could hear the wet wheeze of his breathing. 10 yards to the road. 5 yards. I stumbled, my feet tangling in a hidden branch. I hit the ground hard, sliding on my stomach onto the asphalt of the main road. I rolled over, throwing my hands up to protect my face. He loomed over me against the backdrop of the trees. He raised the axe high, the blade glinting in the darkness. He blocked out the moon. "Good night, David," he whispered. And then the world turned blue. A wash of brilliant, rotating blue and red light swept over us, illuminating the trees, the snow, and the terrified eyes behind the gas mask. Whoop, whoop. The sound of a siren chirped, not in the distance, right there, around the bend. He froze. The axe hovered in the air. We both looked down the road. A sheriff's USV was crawling slowly around the curve, fighting the drifts. It was maybe 50 yards away. The killer looked at the car. Then he looked at me. For a second, I thought he would do it anyway. I thought he would bring the axe down and take the shot, consequences be damned. But self-preservation is a powerful instinct. He lowered the axe. He took a step back into the shadows of the driveway. "You're lucky," he hissed. "You're so lucky." He turned and bolted. Despite the leg, despite the snow, he moved with the speed of a startled deer, vanishing into the dense, dark tree line surrounding the property. "Help!" I screamed, waving my arms frantically at the approaching lights. "He's here! He's here!" The SUV accelerated, fishtailing on the ice, and screeched to a halt 10 feet from me. I collapsed back onto the asphalt, watching the snow fall into the blue-lit sky, and for the first time in 3 days, I let myself close my eyes.
I don't remember much about the immediate aftermath. Shock is a powerful anesthetic. I remember the blinding blue lights of the cruiser reflecting off the snow, turning the world into a strobe-lit nightmare. I remember the heat of the police car blasting against my frozen face, making my skin prickle and burn. And I remember the deputy, a young guy looking pale and sick, vomiting into a snowbank after coming out of the house. They didn't catch him. The storm that had trapped me became his accomplice. The dogs picked up a scent at the edge of the woods, a trail of blood from where I'd stabbed him, but it vanished at the creek line. The water was freezing, moving fast and black. He went into the water to hide his tracks. By the time the state troopers and the helicopter arrived, the blizzard had scrubbed the world clean. He was just gone, dissolved back into the landscape like a bad dream. I spent 3 days in the hospital. Hypothermia, a cracked rib, a sprained shoulder, and severe dehydration. But the physical injuries were nothing compared to what the detectives told me when they finally took my statement. They found the crawl space. They found the jars. They found the mattress. But that wasn't the worst part. The forensic team determined that the nest behind the wardrobe had been occupied for at least 8 months. He was there when the bank foreclosed. He was there when the realtor did the walkthroughs. He was there when I toured the house that first Tuesday. The realtor had mentioned a draft in the hallway. That was him, breathing behind the wall. The smiling guest, as the press dubbed him, wasn't just a squatter. He was a parasite. The police linked DNA found on the mattress to a series of phantom break-ins across 3 states. He doesn't break in to steal. He breaks in to inhabit.
He picks large, isolated homes with single occupants or small families, and he integrates himself into the architecture. He lives in the blind spots. He eats your food, uses your bathroom when you're at work, and watches you sleep until he gets bored, or until he gets hungry. The photos on the wall, there were over 400 of them. The police let me see a few to identify the timeline. There was one of me standing in the driveway on moving day, taken from the attic vent. There was one of me sleeping on the floor that first night. But the one that broke me, the one that makes me wake up screaming in a pool of cold sweat, was a picture of my phone. It was taken while I was in the shower. He had unlocked my phone. He must have watched me type the code over my shoulder a dozen times and taken a photo of the screen. He had been reading my texts. He had been deleting voicemails from my mom so I would feel more isolated. He had been curating my reality. I never went back to the house. I couldn't. I hired a specialized crew to pack my things, and even then I made them burn the furniture. I couldn't touch anything he might have touched. I sold the property to a developer at a massive loss. They tore it down last month. I heard they found more crawl spaces in the basement that the police had missed. More bedding, more jars. I live in the city now. A high-rise, 10th floor, doorman, keycard access, cameras in the hallway. It's the safest place I could find. It's a sterile concrete box floating in the sky, far away from attics and basements and old settling wood. But safety is an illusion. I know that now. I still have the audio recording from that night. I haven't deleted it. Sometimes when I've had too much to drink, I listen to it. I listen to that wet, rattling breathing standing over my bed. I listen to him whisper, "Pretty." It reminds me that I'm not crazy. It reminds me that monsters don't look like monsters. They look like us. They wear our clothes. They drink our coffee. They wait in the spaces we forget to check. And lately, things have been happening in my apartment. Small things. Last week, I came home and the milk carton was sitting on the counter. I'm sure I put it back in the fridge. 2 days ago, I found the toilet seat up. I live alone. And tonight I'm writing this because I can't sleep. I'm sitting in my living room with all the lights on, holding a kitchen knife. Because about an hour ago, I turned off the TV to go to bed. The apartment was silent. High-rise silent. Just the hum of the HVAC and the distant traffic. But then I heard it. It was faint, so faint you would miss it if you weren't listening for it, if you hadn't spent 3 days trapped in a snowstorm with it. It came from the vent above the stove. It's probably just the wind. It's probably just the neighbors. It's probably just the PTSD rewiring my brain to hear threats in the white noise. But I'm looking at the vent cover. It's screwed on tight, but there's a little bit of dust on the floor below it, just a pinch, like someone bumped it from the inside. I'm going to go check it now. I have to know. If I don't post again, do me a favor. Check your walls.